It wasn't too long ago that Skypia was widely considered to be one of the worst arcs in One Piece. Its self-contained nature and the lack of immediate relevance to the rest of the story was the most common criticism. But people changed their tunes when the story started reusing elements from Skypia, and now it's praised as one of the greatest works of foreshadowing in the story. I have disagreements with that, but at the very least it's nice to see it's not being badmouthed so openly. However, it's a shame that despite all of this newfound praise, all of Skypia's best qualities are rarely ever brought up. What I want to communicate is that before any of this, or that, Skypia was already one of the most beautiful and well-told stories to come out of this goofy pirate manga. For a few minutes, let's forget about these scenes because frankly they are not relevant to our main topic. Skypia is a story about how we use both faith and skepticism to cope with the unknown, and the struggle between man's idealized version of adventure and discovery when contrasted with the uglier reality. But let's focus on the ideal first. If it wasn't already introduced through the Straw Hats, then Jai introduced it through Cricket and his crew of salvagers. There are most certainly treasures to be found in salvaging, but even more than that, there's history to find. As Robin points out, the phrase "dead men tell no tales" isn't always true. Robin didn't find any gold by reassembling the skeleton, but the exercise was rewarding for her because humans love puzzles. We love putting pieces together and chasing the satisfaction of discovery. Cricket's goal is to find out whether or not Jaya fell into the sea. He's looking for knowledge and discovery as well as to settle his feud with Noland. Any gold is just a bonus. The fact that everything they salvage comes from individual ships whose original crew is long dead also distances themselves from the harsher reality we'll talk about in a bit. Many adventure stories, including One Piece at times, chooses to revolve around a place or culture that's been long since abandoned or ravaged by time, because it creates a reason for some place to be hidden away, while allowing for the protagonists the rewards of discovery and treasure, without having to worry about the fact that they might be stealing something from someone else. It's the difference between salvaging something lost and just plain stealing it from people and calling it a discovery. You can probably already guess where this is going. But the reason why framing colonization as discovery was so successful is because it's an appealing narrative. Humans love discoveries big and small. One Piece may just be the longest running mystery box story in human history. But as much as we love discovering truth, humans just as easily fall to the unknown. In the face of the inevitable, we desperately resort to faith. And no villain in the story has abused this as effectively as Enel has. And we need to understand him in order to grasp the most important themes of Skypia. With how little I see people go into depth with him, Enel might just be the most underrated element in this entire arc. And the quickest way to understand him is by looking at his most iconic line: "Fear is the kami." Or if you're not a helpless weeb, fear is God. This is a gross oversimplification, but many religions try to explain the unexplained by making it unreachable, and therefore leaves little room to disprove it. While most major religions are so old that finding their exact origin and their specific inspirations behind certain inclusions is next to impossible, what we can see is some general trends that arise from the innate traits humans share, and speculate from there. Fear is something we all understand: fear of danger, death, and the unknown. And fear is an emotion that can not only draw people to faith, but can be encouraged under it. Some people, even in our modern day, want a God-fearing nation, for example. Enel creates fear through power and distance. He can hear every citizen through his mantra and can smite them without needing to be present. He creates the illusion of omnipotence, and then the resulting fear of this unseen ruler turns a powerful man into a god. One misconception I've seen in the community developing around Enel is believing that his prediction of how many survivors would be at the end of his game is hints at future sight observation hockey. But Enel had to act to make this prediction a reality. When the number of survivors entered the single digits, he forced a confrontation hoping to bring it down to 5. And even then he was wrong because unbeknownst to Enel, more survivors were hiding inside of Nola, where his mantra can't see them. Enel is no god and there are things he is ignorant of. In Nolan and Kalgra's time, the Shandians did ritual sacrifice out of genuine ignorance, while Enel reuses the altar to purposely create sacrifices to enforce fear. He has taken several measures in order to create the illusion of omnipotence, and he's went unchallenged for so long that he's starting to believe his own hype. Another part of Enel's deception is in his character design. He's full of divine details like his long earlobes to resemble Buddhist figures, but one look at that drum and we can tell he's using the peacock strategy. All sky people have wings because we're meant to associate them with angels living in the clouds. But Enel can't just be another angel if he is to be a god. It looks like he chose to take out his wings and substitute it with a large extravagant drum set. He's deliberately trying to set himself apart by taking out one of his biological similarities with his kin, and replacing it with something to make himself look more complex and divine. By distinguishing himself like this, he portrays opulence and intimidation. The drum set itself a reference to Raijin, a god of thunder in Japanese mythology. And I can't imagine a more fitting power than lightning for Enel to wield. Not just because lightning is associated with divine wrath across countless religions, but for the same reason that those very trends exist. Lightning is one of the major natural phenomena that humans struggle to understand the most, and it's clearly one of the most powerful. Fire is similarly dangerous, but we can easily interact with it. Early man was capable of controlling and using fire and only had to fear it enough to act cautiously around it. We learned how it worked and how to use fire to our benefit, which is why fire is just as often associated with progress as it is destruction. Think of Prometheus from Greek mythology or Maui from Polynesian mythology, who both stole fire from the gods to share with mankind and allowed them to benefit from it. Similarly, sun gods like Amaterasu and Ra are great providers and creators, because our lives revolve around the sun and the energy, warmth, and light it provides. But lightning would come and go before we can even hear the following thunder. This lack of exposure and understanding, along with its incredibly loud sound and possible danger, made lightning terrifying. Lightning gods can have positive associations, but far as I can tell, their specific ability to wield lightning is almost always portrayed as a weapon to be feared. Zeus, Raijin, Indra, and Thor, just to name a few examples, all of them lionized as powerful warrior gods who smite their enemies with lightning. Even in religions where there is a single god who is all-powerful and capable of anything humans can imagine, such as Abrahamic religions, God's wrath most commonly comes in the form of natural disasters, because humans fear these things that happen in reality and try to justify it in their religious stories. In both real life and the narrative of Skypeia, fear creates misconceptions. Enel, the false god, is most convincing when people can't see or understand him. He's living lightning. He can't be grabbed, he can't be touched, he can't be killed. He can smite you without even needing to be present, and with his godlike omniscience, he can hear every word you say. When Luffy fights a mantra user for the first time, Satori claims his mantra is a power reserved for those faithful to Eneru. But this is another deception. We learned through Aisa that this isn't true. The power of mantra isn't exclusive to Enel or his priests. And the Strats from the Blue Sea understand neither is the power of the Logia Devil Fruit. Luffy and the gang, as well as us readers, have already met Smoker and Crocodile. Enel isn't a new type of threat, just an especially powerful one. Crocodile even created a natural disaster using his Logia power, meaning Enel wasn't unique in this aspect either. By far the best way Skypia is elevated by later parts of the story is not through Nika or retroactive callbacks to a sun god. It's in how it highlights Enel's ignorance. Despite looking down on Luffy as a mere paramecia, the ability to control nature isn't exclusive to Logias. Some of the most powerful characters in the Blue Sea are paramecia users who can also control the weather and create natural disasters. Some of which may even blow Enel's mind, like Fujitori's meteors. Has Enel ever seen an earthquake that can tilt the sea? Has he ever seen storm clouds that are alive and can talk? Characters like Fujitora, Whitebeard, or Big Mom could have easily pulled the same con Enel did. A character that actually did something very similar is Kaido, who tried to portray himself as a wise deity who protects Wano. Speaking of Kaido, is Enel even aware that Logias aren't the rarest type of devil fruit? It's mythical Zoans, such as Kaido, who can manipulate the weather, and even without his dragon fruit, his strength and speed would dwarf Enel's. Enel isn't the first arrogant Logia we meet, and he's far from the last. He assumes he's as powerful and knowledgeable as he has to be, even before he sets out onto a new frontier. If he went to the New World instead of the Moon, it's easy to imagine him ending up like Karabu, unaware of how common Logia powers are and how many people are used to dealing with them. And before he sets off, Enel's first real obstacle can't control the weather or shake the earth, but his immunity to lightning makes him incomprehensible to Enel. The power that makes him a god, the weapon he is feared for, is nothing to this rubber man. What is rubber anyway? Is it the name of a god or a demon? Well, no, it's just a really common substance in the Blue Sea that just happens to be rare in Skypeia. Enel is confronted with fear for the first time. Knowledge is power, and Enel is finally realizing that there are truths even he didn't imagine was possible. And this is a story where anything man can imagine is possible in reality. The quote that opened the arc is a warning to keep an open mind. You don't have to believe in everything, but don't dismiss a possibility until you have reason to do so. And it's a bane to Bellamy as much as it is to Enel. If Enel knew what rubber was ahead of time, he wouldn't have been so rattled by it. The same way the Skypeians would be less willing to call Enel a god if they understood how he got his powers and how they work. Enel is lightning, and lightning is only divine as long as people fear it. And people only fear it when they fail to understand it. To add a layer of irony, Luffy also started the story as a big fish in a small pond called East Blue. But journeying to the Grand Line and his encounter with Crocodile humbled him somewhat, and here he is doing the same to Enel. The people of Mocktown laugh at the unknown and assume they already understand it, while the citizens of Skypia fear the unknown and dare not to scrutinize it. They both blindly believe what is comfortable for them to believe in, whichever option reinforces the worldview they already had or the worldview being forced onto them. The middle ground is found in characters like Gonfall and the Shandians. Gonfall is a former god, understood how arbitrary the title was when given to a mortal man. He was also working with more information than most characters in Skypia. The Shandians have a good idea of how strong Enel is and choose to fight him anyway. Unlike the Skypians, when Wiper says the word kami, it's in quotation marks. In addition, it's evident that they understood Enel was a Delphoid user long before the battle because Wiper came armed with Sea Stone and knowledge of how to use it. Whether it's because his people are from the Blue Sea or because they had simply discovered this in Skypia, the Shandians already had the knowledge to see through Enel's charade of godhood. My favorite skeptic in this saga is without a doubt Nami. She is constantly skeptical of the Sky Island's existence. She's the reasonable doubter amongst the group. But because her friends are dragging her along, she's willing to put in the work to see if she's right or not. And she ends up being rewarded for her efforts. Her enthusiasm only increases the longer the arc goes on and the more treasure she sniffs out. And while she starts off hoping for tangible rewards like Nolan's King and Enel, she's willing to give it up at the end of the arc. The gold isn't as important as the friends who brought her on this unforgettable adventure. And her dream of mapping the world took a huge step forward because now she's confirmed the existence of Sky Islands. Nami's reasonable doubt also shows the struggle of someone staunchly rational, chasing after a lofty dream. Luffy and Zoro won't ever care what others think. They won't bend to laughter, but Nami has to overcome embarrassment early into the saga. Her more grounded disposition made this hurdle unavoidable. It's a small moment, but one I love a lot. Her understanding of science and the weather also allowed her to hold off Enel for a bit, in tandem with the idea that knowledge is Enel's worst enemy. I once said that Punk Hazard introduced science as a larger theme in the story, but that's not really true. In truth, it reintroduced it. The Skypia saga is the first arc to bring it into focus. It's less focused on ideas like technological progress and weaponry, although that is briefly commented upon. Skypia is more so focused on archaeology, meteorology, geology, and their scientific methods. Several characters make hypotheses and predictions around Sky Island and the mystery of Jaya, and we see how well they hold up as the story continues. In fact, Hanami's map charting skills is the key to discovering the connection between Jaya and the Verth. A very well done mystery plot that's fun to try and piece together on a first read through. So many set pieces are reused like Cricket's house, the picture book, the knockup stream, and so much more. Bellamy wasn't necessarily wrong when he insisted there's a scientific explanation for everything. Skypia is a land of wonder, but that's only because it's relatively advanced compared to most of the world. Even the mysterious abilities the priests use like Shura's fire lance and Satori's balls and gloves are revealed to be based on technology. The dials can be utilized by anyone. The Shandians have learned to use them in unique ways, and eventually Usopp and Nami will integrate them into their weapons as well. Where Bellamy is wrong is how he assumed he already knew everything there is to know about the phenomenon around Jaya. His claims that the knockup stream causes the falling ships is plausible, but we as readers alongside the Strats already have the knowledge to debunk him, or at least refute him. The ship that almost fell on the Strats was roughly 200 years old. It'd be more ridiculous to claim that an unmanned ship was suspended in the air for 2 centuries, than to believe that something was up there to keep it from falling. Even the log pose itself is a small hint. Chapter 218 is called Why the Log Pose is Dome-Shaped. If it was designed to only lock onto islands at sea level, then it would be flat like a normal compass. Whoever designed the log pose must have taken places like Skypia and Fishman Island into account while designing it. As for Luffy, his beliefs are rarely stated outright. Unlike Blackbeard, he never asserted that the Sky Islands exist in Mocktown. Just like how he never insisted that the One Piece is real, only that he'll be the one to find it and be Pirate King if it does. Given that he says he doesn't know whether or not the One Piece exists or not when he meets Rayleigh, he doesn't 100% know himself at this point of the adventure. But that's okay, because discovering the truth is part of the fun. He doesn't want to know if Skypia exists until he gets there himself. Spoilers make the adventure boring. All of these subplots and larger themes make Skypia a great arc to endear Robin to the viewer before she's kidnapped at Water 7. She cares as much as an outsider can about Shandora's history and actually fights to defend it from Yama. She's a scholar who doesn't just take intellectual pleasure from other cultures, but will bleed to defend even what some consider to be the most insignificant parts of it. And her mission to find the true history ends up fulfilling the centuries-long duties the Shandians had to protect the Bell. She's directly contrasted with firstly Yama in her fight, and then Enel, who assumes she's in Shandora looking for gold, when in reality that didn't even cross her mind until Enel brought it up. She was too busy appreciating everything else wonderful about Shandora. The idea of what is and isn't sacred ties really easily into Nami's want for gold in both Skypia and in Orangetown, where the central conflict was about distinguishing between personal treasure and mere wealth. And similarly, Noland has to come to understand what the Shandians value. Kalgar would eventually come to stop seeing the snakes as gods due to Noland's influence, but what doesn't change is his stance on the ancestor trees. The Shandians on Skypia don't merely want the buildings or the gold back, or even just the poneglyph and the bell that means so much to them. Their sense of spirituality is tied to the grounded trees that they live with. Spiritualism isn't a good justification for acts like sacrifice, and in current day, even though Nola and the snakes are still around, the Shandians stopped worshipping them as gods. Instead, they ask for their ancestor Kalgar to watch over and protect them. Independence and self-reliance is a consistent theme in Skypia. On a large scale, it's commented that relying on a god to save you rarely works out, shown best through Konus' arc. But it's also seen when Chopper goes from calling for help at the first sign of danger, to having his first real one-on-one fight as a pirate. And similarly, the edgy atheist Zoro refuses to pray to Kami when he first enters Upper Yard, and again when he defeats Ohm. But spiritualism doesn't exist just as a crutch, it's also a powerful framing device. We've talked about some negative practices of religion, but there's at least one that I think we can all agree is a positive, regardless of your spiritual beliefs. Mourning and honoring the dead in community benefits the living even more so than it does the departed. It gives us appreciation for who we've lost and who we still have. It ingrains a reverence for our passing elders, or sympathy and a reminder of caution from our children who were taken too soon. Ironically, even though Noland initially enters Shandor as an educated adventurer, here to wipe away ignorance, his own ignorance of the Shandians led him to cause damage without even realizing it. As a botanist, wiping out sick trees is natural for Noland. What was familiar to him led him to a hasty decision. Even if wiping the trees was what was best for the island, the right thing to do would have been to inform Kalgar and let his people make the call. It's their land after all, their treasures at stake. But his lack of knowledge kept him from even asking the question. Noland and Kalgar's farewell has always made me cry. But what makes it more emotional for me as I revisit the story is the fact that there's still so much more Noland and Kalgar had to learn from one another. The last thing Noland does before leaving is realizing that there were parts of Shandian's culture he didn't understand. And the last thing Kalgar does before saying goodbye is realize why Noland felt the need to chop down the trees. As much as they bonded, they both still could have understood each other better. And I'm certain that's something both of them never stopped looking forward to until the end. In a way, their friendship was an adventure all its own. Noland's arc with Kalgar weirdly ends up tying into an arc Luffy will have much later in the story. One of Luffy's character arcs that has been a really slow burn is how he progressively cares more about the particular histories of the islands he visits. At first he cared so little about the past that he would sleep through a character's backstory. And in Fishman Island, this almost bit him in the ass when his ignorance almost destroyed the Noah. If he wasn't stopped by Shirahoshi, that would have been the equivalent of him destroying the Golden Bell. Compare that to Wano, where he actually ended up listening through Kinemon's story. On one hand, you can say he was goaded into it by tales of Odin and Roger's adventures, as he has a personal interest in the Roger pirates and adventure as a concept, but he learned about Wano's history nonetheless. Luffy may care a bit more about history going forward. Honestly, it's hard to imagine he won't want to hear the story on Laugh Tale, but I think Luffy is ultimately always going to live in the present. In order to illustrate that no matter what happened to lead up to these terrible people coming into power, the way they've been running things is still wrong. Wanting freedom is natural. You don't need to point at past injustices or centuries of history in order to condemn injustice happening today. And Robin will always be there to care about the past too distant for Luffy to even conceive. One aspect of Enel that I don't see enough people talk about is how he has some intellectual interest in history but chooses not to let it affect his goals or actions. He's in a position of power and knowledge and could use it to better understand the world around him. And his talk with Robin implies he's somewhat curious about the topic and even takes pleasure in an intellectual conversation. But I get the impression it's a very cheap sort of pleasure. He's curious about Robin's ability to read the poneglyphs, he's the first kami to find the City of Gold, and he's aware of accounts from 400 years ago when Shandora arrived in Skypia. He even uses them to accurately guess the location of the Golden Bell. Heck, he even hints that he knows that the Sky races weren't originally from the Sky Islands, calling the country unnatural, and telling Wiper and Gonfall that their conflict is much deeper than they are even aware of. He's not just blatantly ignorant and disinterested in history like some characters like Yama or Bellamy. Enel is arguably the most knowledgeable character in the entire arc. yet he doesn't truly pursue his curiosity. He almost comes across like an armchair intellectual, trying to show off. Otherwise, he's only using his knowledge to try and find more gold and land. Only interested in what he can gain, what he can steal from those who came before him. In short, he's a stereotypical colonizer. He would destroy what little is left of Shandora's history along with Skypia because with all the gold gone, he has nothing left to take from it. If you want a deeper take on how Skypia tackles colonialism, there's this amazing video by a channel called Lost Futures that I'm going to point to you right now. It's really good. It's going to illustrate the difference between someone who dabbles in anthropology and an actual history buff. Ironically, the Shandians never cared much for the gold. The real treasures of Shandora are the poneglyphs that hold their true history, the trees that house their ancestors, the soil that grew them, and the only piece of gold which had spiritual and emotional value, the light of Shandora. Shandora is so much more than its gold. It even has lesser treasures like its pumpkins which make delicious juice. Gonfal's love for Shandora's pumpkin juice rather than its gold shows the simple benefits that can come from interacting and trading with other cultures. It poses Gonfal as less greedy than Enel and as someone who wants to learn more about the Shandians. He did learn how to grow these pumpkins himself after all, and these pumpkins were originally a gift from Nolan, creating a positive association. But Gonfal is still only thinking of terms of what he can get out of Shandora. He's unwilling to give the land back despite his sympathy because, simply put, he's put his people's wants before the Shandorans' needs. As long as he's been alive, his people own the Verth, so he doesn't want to rock the boat. Despite his open mind, he still fell back to what was familiar to him. To his people, anything that came off the knockup stream was a blessing from the heavens, their god-given property. But this reverence didn't extend to the original inhabitants of Jaya. While both have religious motivations for wanting Shandora, one of them was clearly greedy and wrong, feeding into what we see between Nolan and Kulgara. Religion can't excuse or justify everything, and Gonfal can only be sympathetic because he admits to his and his people's faults and seeks to amend them. And at the end of the story, it all comes back to the Golden Bell. A single action that ties so many plot threads together in a wonderful bow. Luffy's motivations intersect with Wiper and Gonfal's and the rest of the Skypians and Shandians. He could leave Skypia with a giant ball of gold, but chooses to stay because he has to ring that bell to let Cricket know what happened to Shandora. While Wiper wants the souls of his ancestors to return, and for Nolan to hear the sound of the bell. And the bell's ring was imagined to signal the end of conflict on Skypia. I don't think any other arc's climax even touches Skypia's, it's just that good. At the very end, the Strahd try to steal Shandora's gold, but it's posed as more mischievous than malicious. Finding hidden gold is the optics of a fun adventure to Luffy. Nami shows she's grown beyond that greedy mindset by the end of the arc, but still can't help but grab at an easy find. They view themselves as bad dudes doing bad things, but it's undermined by the fact that they could have gone away with a lot more if they didn't steal anything in the first place. They're simultaneously rewarded for saving the Shandians and Skypians, while punished for being greedy. It's without a doubt one of the funniest outros to any story arc, and it still feels tasteful towards the overall tone and subject matter. Now let's talk about the N-word. As the story gets closer to its ending, I find myself wondering exactly how many of the mysteries will be explained and to what degree. Personally, I hope not everything is explained in painstaking detail, so that the world will always keep a glimmer of wonder in it. Even if the wiki pages get longer, erasing all mystique from the setting will only make our impressions of it grow smaller. I don't need to know what these giant things out in Thriller Bark are. I don't need an exposition dump explaining the science behind a Klabautermann. I don't need Enel to explain why and when he decided to become a god. I can infer that much on my own. This is an idea I brought up in my Egghead video. I am almost certain that we're going to learn more about the origin of devil fruits. But as of right now, I believe all mythical zones like the sun god Nika or the Phoenix never existed until the devil fruits brought them into existence, as we've yet to see a natural counterpart to any mythical zone. If these creatures did exist at one point, then they may as well be ancient zoans, instead of mythical ones. For now, all we have to go off is Vegapunk's words, and he said devil fruits were dreamed into existence. I really like the idea of these wonderful creatures and gods not existing in literal, tangible ways until human imagination brought them into existence. It complements the romanticization of dreams and the characters who tried to make them a reality. Even if you're an atheist, you can't deny divine inspiration is real and has tangible effects on reality. If it didn't, the fictional story One Piece, and especially the Skypia arc, wouldn't be half as cool as it is right now. With that said, this might be a weird place to end on, but I want to tell you about my least favorite thing about the inclusion of Nika. I am glad that the current story is reusing elements from Skypia, if only because it's making people take a second look to appreciate the arc more. However, I don't think that Skypia is a particularly better arc for it. Sure, epic foreshadowing, even if done retroactively, can be really cool. But it's not why I love One Piece. And if it's what you love most about One Piece, then you sound like a dreadfully boring person. As of chapter 1044, Luffy's powers now come from a fruit with the name of a god, which I have very mixed feelings about overall. I have confidence the future of the story can use this inclusion in cool ways, however its past is another matter entirely. Luffy's devil fruit is no longer merely a mundane substance Enel hasn't seen before. He's not a mortal man bringing another mortal man out of his delusions of godhood and onto his level anymore. It's now a battle between a fake god and a real god. Sure, we can pull mental gymnastics like pre-awakening it's just a rubber fruit and post-awakening that's when he gets the god status, but overall the point that I loved has either been muddled or it has been switched to something I feel is a lot less cool. It's just a bit of a shame. And with that said, thank you for watching. Link subscribe if you want to see more, and I'm gonna be honest. I think Pagaya's death, being a fake out, was great. Because frankly, any emotional value you get from his death does not compare to how funny it is when he comes back. Let's be honest, I don't think any of us cried or thought it was an especially well done scene. People just point out his fake out to be mad. Really cool, really good, and it made me laugh while I had tears streaming down my face because I was fresh off reading the Nolan Calgary flashback. This arc is so great.